Hello fiber friends, I'm ReRe and this is Exploration Crochet, part of the Yarn Over Hook network. After my last podcast where I talked about what I thought were my worst and favorite things about crochet, the innovations, I decided that now was as good a time as any to start looking more deeply at those things. So, with this episode, I'm going to start a series that I'll be calling Foundations, a crochet chain of events, or the hook through time, 200, whatever. I don't know. I'm still workshopping it. But anyway, this is my first installment, Crochet Unchained. For nearly 200 years, one structure reigned supreme in the world of crochet. It was the gatekeeper of virtually every blanket, every shawl, every washcloth, and the absolute law of the craft. I'm talking about the starting chain. Every craft has a day one lesson. In knitting, it's the cast on. In baking, it's preheat the oven. And in crochet, for over 2 centuries, that lesson has been the starting chain. It was the very first thing we learned after making a slip knot. Yarn over, pull through a loop. Repeat until you have a chain the length you need. As novices to the craft, we were just so excited to see something growing out of our hands. But there was also a secret frustration. You finish that long, beautiful chain, you try to work your first row of stitches into it, and it's tight or it's rigid, resulting several rows on in a curve where there should be a straight base in your otherwise lovely project. For most of history, we were told this was just the nature of the beast, so we adjusted. Well, today, we're going to explore the former Achilles heel of crochet, that starting chain. We'll be tracing its journey from 17th century France to the modern era, and we'll see just how the starting chain became the head honcho. I'll introduce to many of you the brilliant maverick crochet instructor Bill Elmore, who, in the 90s, challenged the status quo. And we'll discuss the 2004 editorial war that finally changed the way patterns were written. Today, we're talking about the evolution of starting. To understand why the starting chain reigned supreme for so long, we have to look at the birth of the craft. Before crochet was a household word, it was an evolution of tambour embroidery, a technique where you used a hook to place loops on a piece of fabric. For more on that, please check out my podcast, Crochet Through Time. The breakthrough happened when someone realized you didn't need the fabric. You could just pull loops through other loops. The French called this crochet dans l'air, crochet in the air. A key breadcrumb in our history is a 1653 French patent from the era of Louis XIV. It describes a decorative trim being made on a crochet and specifically mentions chains in the air. This tells us that the chain as a freestanding structure was already part of the hooked tool ecosystem, centuries before modern crochet was codified. By the time the first patterns appeared in the Dutch magazine Penelope in 1823, the starting chain was the only known way to begin. It was tool native. A hook makes a chain faster than any other structure. By 1840, when English language icons like Jane Gauguin began publishing instruction books, the chain was taught as a repeatable, universal system. The starting chain became the start of choice for 3 very practical reasons. 1, it's tool native. 2, it's portable. You can build almost any stitch, shells, ripples, mesh, anything on top of it. 3, it's teachable. In the earliest published patterns, it was just easier to write, make a chain. It was the ultimate minimum viable product for a new craft being taught to a mass audience. It won the historical format war because it was easy to describe in text. In an era before YouTube or high-definition photography, an author could simply write 100 chain. It was the cleanest way to explain flat crochet. But this convenience came with a structural cost. For more than a century, the starting chain was crochet's legacy system. Flawed, but universally used. The core problem wasn't skill or lack thereof, it was physics. A chain is essentially a line of linked slip knot structures with very little give. But most crochet fabric, double crochet, ripples, shells, even basic rows, have more width and elasticity. When you stack an elastic first row on top of a rigid chain, the chain behaves like a slight drawstring. It cinches the bottom edge while the fabric above expands. That's how you get the infamous curve, tight at the base, flaring above. From the Victorian era through the 1980s, the mainstream fix wasn't stop using chains. It was patch the chain. Because it wasn't a bug, it was a feature. So manuals and pattern writers kept repeating the same workaround. First, the hook swap. Chain with a hook 1 or 2 sizes larger, then switch back for row 1, basically forcing slack into the starting chain. 2. The back bump maneuver. Work into the back ridge, what some people refer to as the pearl bump, instead of the front or back loop of the V. This not only gives a cleaner edge and a bit more flexibility, but its downside is it's slower and can be fussier. And then finally, the straight up tension fix. Just chain loosely. These patches matter historically because they prove crocheters always knew the truth. The starting chain doesn't behave like the fabric above it. But the deeper issue stayed untouched because crochet starts were built around two-step workflow that was deeply embedded in how patterns were taught and published. Chain first, then work row 1 into it. So, for roughly 150 years, we treated the symptoms instead of the cause. The chain wasn't replaced, it was coerced, it was cajoled, it was coaxed, it was negotiated with. But eventually, the craft world started asking a question that changed everything. What if the solution isn't making a better chain? What if the solution is don't chain first at all? This is where our story starts its turn into the modern era. Chainless starts undoubtedly existed for years as a passed around trick. Folks in circles shared it and teachers shared it, but the reach was small. It wasn't part of crochet's official vocabulary. That began to change in the late 1990s and early 2000s, thanks to a few technical mavericks and one designer who finally broke the publishing wall. A name that often comes up in this transition is Bill Elmore. Elmore was a legendary instructor with a structure-first mindset. He promoted what he called a chainless foundation, driven by a simple, revolutionary idea. Why make a chain and then work into it when you can build the chain and the stitch at the same time? By pulling up a loop, chaining to create a base, and then completing the stitch, you create a foundation that behaves more like the fabric above it. More elastic, less curves. And we're going to circle back to Mr. Elmore in future episodes. But even with Elmore and other teachers advocating for chainless starts, the technique hit its biggest obstacle: editorial resistance. In my podcast, Twisted Tales, Frogging Crochet Stereotypes, I talk about the power women's magazines had in setting the tone for what crochet could and should be, and how crocheters followed suit until they didn't. Pattern publishers wanted instructions that were short, familiar, and beginner-proof. Imagine being a magazine editor in 2002. It's easy to print chain 150. It's much scarier to replace that with a multi-step exercise and a new abbreviation, especially when page space is expensive and you're afraid readers will panic. The designer who finally pushed the technique through that wall was Doris Chan. Around spring 2004, she began insisting that foundation stitches belonged in published patterns, and she later recalled the incredible resistance she received from editors. But 2004 becomes the tipping point. That year, Interweave Crochet and Family Circle began actually printing FSC, Foundation Single Crochet, in their glossaries. Once it's in print, it becomes real. It has a name, an abbreviation, and a standardized definition, meaning designers could now use it without re-explaining it from scratch every time. After that, everything accelerates. By the mid-aughts, publishers' ecosystems were routinely listing and defining FSC, Foundation Single Crochet. By 2006, FDC, Foundation Double Crochet, shows up in mainstream teaching and publishing contexts. By 2007, crocheters are spotting these starts in magazines and buzzing about them in forums. And by the blogging boom around 2009, the chainless foundation crosses the final threshold. It moves from industry technique to common knowledge. This wasn't the craft suddenly realizing the need for elasticity. It's publishing finally saying out loud, yes, you don't have to start with a chain. By the early 2010s, the blogging boom and YouTube tutorial explosion had turned the foundation single and the foundation double crochet from niche tricks into everyday skills. The terminology had largely stabilized by 2007, and major publications were already using foundation stitch starts in mainstream magazines. Then, as the decade rolled on, especially around 2012, garment patterns increasingly began offering foundation stitches as an option, because makers wanted what patterns were finally starting to optimize for: better fit, nicer drape, more comfort, and cleaner, more professional edges. So let's talk about why chainless foundations caught fire. They fixed crochet's big pain, the starting line. Foundation stitches build the chain and the first row at the same time. You make a stitch that creates its own base. And that structural change solved three huge problems. 1. Elasticity. The foundation chain creates a stretchier fabric-like edge, which is a game changer for cuffs, hems, hats, socks, bands, anything that needs give. 2. A cleaner, more professional edge, plus better access later. A foundation stitch creates a braid-like edge that looks like the top of a row, giving you a more polished underside and making borders, edging, and add-on later features far easier. Finally, counting and working into that chain. A large chain can be a counting trap. How many chains do you actually need? And then, how many do you add for the turn? And then, do those chains count as the first stitch? Oh, and with regard to turning chains, Elmore had a solution for that too, but that's another podcast. With a foundation stitch, you can count actual stitches as you go. Stop anytime, and if you need 2 more, simply add 2 more. No frogging what you've done to get at the starting chain so you can fix it, and then redoing the actual stitches. And yes, there's a bonus. Long starts become less awful. If the pattern says chain 312, a chainless foundation feels like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Not that you'd actually want to kill birds. But, and this is important, the starting chain still matters. So I'm not here to cancel the chain. It's still perfect for lace motifs where chains are part of the design language, mesh and fillet structures, decorative chain spaces, projects where you want firmness at the bottom edge, or anytime you need a very specific chain-based architecture. Think of it like this. The starting chain is the classic doorway. Foundation chains are the modern sliding glass door. Both will get you into the house. Which is why I'm sure there are folks listening to this podcast right now and thinking, a foundation, what? What in the world is she talking about? Despite the fact that this innovation has been around for so long and the fact that it alleviates some serious issues, especially in the realm of garment making, a lot of pattern writers, for whatever reason, are still starting their instructions with chain so many and turn. Fiber friends, here's the takeaway. First, the starting chain didn't evolve because it was bad. It evolved because crocheters are problem solvers, and we were finally permitted to put better solutions into print. Second, it's not dead. It's still the best way to start delicate lace or a project that needs that structure. But for more than 20 years, crocheters have had another option. We owe a debt to the Victorian pioneers who standardized the chain, to the mavericks who saw a better way, and to the designers who fought editors to get those techniques into print. So, the next time you pick up your hook and prepare to start a new project, take a moment to think about that first row. And remember, you have access to 200 years of technical development. Use it. If you've enjoyed this little trip through crochet's evolution, share this episode with a crochet friend, especially the ones who start too tightly and insist it's fine. For the Stitch Curious, I'll leave links to the yarn over hook tutorials for the foundation single, double, and treble in the show notes. This has been Exploration Crochet. Thank you for listening.